who was originally scheduled to speak today could not make it due to a death in the family. But we are lucky to have Henry O, who's the Director of Strategic Initiatives from Animoca, and he's been with the company from the beginning. He has a master's from Stanford in mobile communications, and I'll just let him go.
Good afternoon,
Welcome,
everyone.
Henry.
Hope you all enjoyed your lunch. I'm standing in for David Kim. I send his apologies. If there's any of you who showed up and you're David Kim groupies, I'm sorry to disappoint you. My talk will be focused on mass niche audiences, and that's basically getting into how Animoca develops its game and its strategies for managing its portfolio. Now, mass and niche. So right now, there's companies who spend lots of money on games. It's been written about quite a bit. And there are companies that are making a lot of money off of just one or two titles, millions of dollars a day. And so as a game developer, what do? Do you focus your resources in putting more money into developing bigger games with better graphics? Or do you go after smaller niche audiences and target those audiences in the hopes, as what Sven said, making a lot of little drops make an ocean. So examples of that, mass versus niche. And granted, it is the San Francisco Bay Area, so some of the examples might not hold to the point because everything's a little bit backwards here, but just bear with me. So Budweiser, mass. Microbrews, niche. Oftentimes the opposite in San Francisco, but you get the idea. Ford Taurus, mass, design product. Toyota Prius, niche design product, except for maybe in San Francisco. So in the game space, you have Angry Birds, a game that has a large demographic appeal, has made a lot of money. For us, we have a game called Stargirl. It's an RPG-based game for girls and women, and has been doing quite well. So our basic strategy is enabled by the growth of mobile. Everybody knows mobile is growing. So here are some numbers. Now what we do is we try to focus on the long tail in the niche markets. So how do we do that? We identify the niche markets that we want to target. They can be by region, by country, by age, gender, income, what their interests are, and we're helped in doing this by a lot of the targeting platforms. Facebook has a very effective targeting platform. So 1% might seem pretty niche, but if you go after certain audiences and certain countries, in the aggregate, it can be quite a large number. So if you want 20 million users, we have, Animoca has over 300 games and about over 200 million downloads to date since it started in 2011. So if you want to get to 20 million users, you could try to focus your resources on creating a mass hit. Or you could try to go after 1% of a handful of smaller markets that your competitors might be ignoring. So one example of how a brand is able to do this, you take something like Colgate. Now Colgate, if it was just one tube of toothpaste called Colgate, probably would not be as successful in the marketplace as it is. But since it's able to kind of branch out and create a lot of different niche products to serve different audiences, it's able to capture more market share in total. By the same token, that's what we tried to do with some of our apps in our hit, Pretty Pet Salon. Once Pretty Pet Salon became a hit, we created a lot of different iterations of Pretty Pet Salon to target more selective niches within that audience group. So we have Pretty Pet Salon Seasons, Pretty Pet Toy Store, Pet Cafe, and these are all different genre types. Now for Pretty Pet Salon, the international user base, Animoca's user base does not exactly mirror this. Animoca's user base is a little more evenly distributed between North America, Asia, and Europe is a much higher number. But for this example, you could see with Pretty Pet Salon, we were able to achieve 25 million downloads, and this is the distribution. Rather than being in one country and have 90% of our users in one country, it's fairly diverse so that we can spread our risk. As well, we have internationalization of content and IP. So for example, we acquired the license rights to Mr. Bean recently, so we can target Europe and some of the other countries that Mr. Bean is a popular IP. Thor has done well for us in North America. We're also bringing in some IP like Ultraman, Astro Boy, Wallace and Gromit, things like this to broaden our demographic appeal. So Mass niche through demographic targeting. So as you can see, if we have a range of different apps in our portfolio, we try to have a volume play. So if we have over 300 apps, and we have apps that target various particular niches, then in the aggregate, we're able to achieve scale and volume and size and revenue. So Stargirl, for example, which launched last winter. It's an RPG for girls, has over 10 million installs, and this is the market breakdown that you can see. So what we've learned from our experiences is, first you have to identify a niche segment. So you have to ask yourself as a gaming company, which niches do you understand the best? It could be your country that you're currently based in. It could be a certain type of genre type that your team has the most experience in. But identify a niche segment that you feel like you have a competitive advantage over. And then use targeted marketing strategies. So if you are trying to achieve geographic diversity and achieve a global reach, know what marketing channels to use and acquisition channels to use, and which ones are strong in one parts of the world compared to others. And some of that you'll have to take off of your personal experience, and some of that you can learn by talking to your friends. Leverage analytics to understand your niche. So for example, Pretty Pet Salon, which I demonstrated, was a hit that we thought would appeal primarily towards females. But as the game became more popular, we found that a lot of males were playing it. Perhaps surreptitiously, and they didn't want to advertise it, but they were playing. And so we were able to then, if we go back to our prior slide, you see My Car Salon, which is an iteration of Pretty Pet Salon, but geared more towards men or boys in the IP and the art style. So that's an example of using your analytics to understand that the Pretty Pet Salon niche that we were trying to go for was actually broader than we thought. So we actually created an iteration to expand that demographic reach. And then iterate based on audience preferences. So Stargirl, for instance, we've put in a lot of additional levels and experiences based on customer feedback. And sometimes the versions that we create for different parts of the world are different based on the feedback that we're getting. Leverage early adopters to ignite virality. So basically what that means is when you launch a game, if you are launching it in a niche, know how that niche works, who the tastemakers are in that segment, and how you can get and establish a reputation in that niche market very quickly and aggressively. And it's important that that relates into number one, and number two is knowing your niche. Internationalize your app, as I mentioned, having a global reach is very important. And then iterate, iterate, iterate. And that's to say learn based off of past data and mistakes that you may have made. But then there's a balance that you have to strike between iteration and cost. Because part of the goal of this philosophy is to spread your risk. You can spend $3 million, let's say, on building a game. And if that game goes to market and does not do well, that's a $3 million investment that you've lost out on. If, for example, you can make 10 apps for $300,000 that are much more targeted towards a niche segment, you have 10 swings, basically, where maybe 3 or 4 of those pan out and have some type of user base. And in the aggregate, if you have enough apps out in the marketplace, that can be a substantial user base for you to monetize and then cross-promote with. So that is the end of the slide. I want to leave a lot of time for Q&A because I think this is a topic that I can speak to and might have a lot of questions out in the audience.
Question, sir?
How confident are you about the gender of your players? How do you determine that?
So a lot of our IP, like I mentioned with Pretty Pet Salon, we made assumptions about gender. But right now, in terms of the targeting and being able to identify gender, a lot of it is through triangulation. So in terms of, to answer your question, how confident are we? Over 50%, but would I say it approaches anywhere close to like alpha level 0.05? No. It's triangulated at the moment. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, sort of.
Sorta. So to answer it more specifically, so for example, if you were to do Facebook integration in your game, right? And you have access to that person's sociograph, They might have a different gender than what they are, or they might not list their gender, but based on a series of data points, you can make certain inferences and assumptions based on whether they're female or male. You might be wrong in some cases, in outlier cases, but in a lot of cases you'll be correct.
If you have a question, would you please raise your hand and I'll bring the mic to you?
I've got one while people are deciding. How do you know your niche? You make these games for girls, young girls. Was the company started by young girls? How do you guys know that audience? How do you get factual information about their playing habits, spending habits, behaviors, that kind of thing?
Sure. So part of that is the DNA of the company Animoca. Animoca started in January 2011, but the company that it spun out from has been around since 1998 and started as an email company in Hong Kong. But it along the way acquired game assets and acquired various IPs to characters that appeal to female audiences and the cute demographic. So when we started making smartphone apps, that was naturally the niche that we were attracted to because our graphic designers knew how to make that style of art, that Asian style of art. They knew that type of genre and segment, so it wasn't that much of a shift for us. And we started with that core base of expertise and then expanded from there.
And do you do ongoing research, focus groups? How do you stay in touch with that demographic? Do you?
So we don't do focus groups, but we use a lot of analytics and also analytics, player data, player feedback to get a sense of who our audience is.
Okay.
And at a certain point, and this shouldn't be overlooked, at a certain point, if you have enough kind of small apps that have a significant audience, the amount that you have to be precise in knowing details about that audience, the need declines the more that you have volume play, right? Because if you have one app or two apps that have a high number of DAUs and MAUs, and you really need to monetize that app and understand your players very effectively, you really need to understand who your player base is and what the demographics are. But if you're going for a more volume-based play, where you have a lot of smaller apps, then it's not so important that you know exactly who's playing your game, because you're looking at from more of a performance standard.
Does part of the strategy's success depend to some degree on cloning, reskinning, or /engine reusage? I mean, those games do seem to have a lot of similar qualities to them, so are you basically...
So we look at development of engines, of course, as an investment, right? So to the extent that we're able to reuse certain parts of the engine, or an engine is modular, then of course we'll reuse that. There's no point in redeveloping the wheel. So we do try to take advantage of that. So an example would be if we have a time-based time management game like Pretty Pet Salon, and we got the IP for, let's say, Mr. Bean, then we might take the game, customize it for Mr. Bean, but use a lot of the same engine elements.
I got you.
Clearly, you're a strong proponent of iteration. Do you have any analytics on the number of users that say you start with your main title, and then how many users just stick with that, or they diversify into your iterated versions?
So what we'll do is if we launch an app, we'll cross-promote some of our existing user base into that app along with paid marketing and organic installs. And then depending on the user's performance within that app, some of them we want them to stay, and some of them we're willing to cross-promote to either outside of our network or within our portfolio of apps.
So is your focus on new user, or is your focus on long-term user moving into new titles?
Both. So to answer your question, both. And also to add another point, it depends on the prices for paid acquisition at that point. So if the prices are very high, then it's more likely we'll use a different strategy.
Right. This kind of piggybacks on top of that. Yeah. So when you are acquiring new users, are you going with the LTV of obviously you have a conversion factor that you can cross promote. So like, are you getting, here's the ARPU of this game, and then like it's all one big LTV, so you're able to acquire based on that?
So we basically have a global in-house standard for what we'd like to see our games achieve. So I think that answers part of your question. In terms of Whether or not we lump them all in together for that purpose, no, we don't. But we do have a sense of what a game should be making on an ARPU basis, and we will adjust accordingly. And if it doesn't meet that, and the maintenance costs are higher than what it's making, then we'll just take the game out of our library. And just to emphasize, we have between our 300 apps, about 90% is developed in-house, 10% is third-party published.
Anything else? Let's give a hand to Henry, who stepped in at the last minute to do this presentation and did a great job. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everyone.